And we'll talk less about the Taoiseach, no more about the country for the next few minutes, which is apparently going backwards. That was the suggestion in the title of an influential missive written by the tech billionaire John Collison in Saturday's Irish Times, in which he argued that the country's inability to build infrastructure and housing stems from a shift of power from elected politicians to unaccountable agencies and officials. Fianna Fáil's John Connolly, Patricia Stephenson of the Social Democrats and Louise Burne of the Irish Examiner are all still with me. John, when your namesake John Collison suggests we can't build anything anymore, is he right? I
don't think so. I think there has been a change in the approach to infrastructure development in this government already. I don't think the last government had the same emphasis on infrastructure development, if I was to be honest. But I think we've seen Minister Chambers has already established an infrastructure division within the Department of Public Expenditure. He's also established the Accelerating Infrastructure Task Force, and that will publish a report next month with an action plan for development. And that includes, I think, which is a note to John Collison's article, that includes someone from TII, someone from Uisce Éireann, someone from EirGrid, someone from the ESB, and I think John Collison made one very good point, that they were all planning development in a siloed manner, and to a degree maybe some of their plans conflicted with one another, and that delayed them, and that this makes it far more harmonious, and we can develop in that manner. But might John Collison not say this is exactly the evidence of the type of stuff I'm talking about, the establishment of a division and the establishment of a task force, and they're going to produce a report, and that report is going to be an action plan to do something at some point in the future instead of... But I don't think we've had them before, Kieran. I think that's the point. We haven't had an accelerating infrastructure task force previously. We've had all those agencies developing their own strategic plans and their own plans for development. But now we've brought them together in the accelerating infrastructure task force. This month also we'll see the sectoral plans for the National Development Plan. Each government department, previously the National Development Plan was one massive document across all government departments. Now we'll have a different development plan for each sector, and I think that will make it more easier to develop, but also make it more targeted.
You know the types of things people are going to be screaming at their television. They're going to be talking about bypasses around Galway in your own county. They're going to be talking about M20s. They're going to be talking about light rail systems, about Metrolink. They're going to be talking about the National Children's Hospital. And more than anything else, they're going to be screaming housing at the television. And they'll say all of that is evidence that despite this new emphasis from government, that John Collison is right. Maybe not in everything he says, but in the tenor of the article, that we're actually really slow at delivering key projects.
Well, I think the infrastructure is crucial towards developing the housing. There's no doubt about that. But actually, I don't think the government would contend or would be contesting what John Collison said. But I think the government are fairly confident that the changes that Minister Chambers has made, which we will hopefully see over in the short term, changes of how we develop our infrastructure that will make housing development easier.
Patricia, is he right, John Collison, in the suggestion that we've become too slow and too cautious in terms of
yeah, well, we've certainly become too slow. I mean, just, the infrastructure challenges are endless. You named a few, but like take Irish Water, Uisce Éireann, we're being told in Kilkenny, and this is the same in every county across the country, that towns and villages just won't have any new homes for the next 15 years because there's no water. Sorry about that. This is chronic, whether it comes to housing, whether it comes to other development, and it's a massive challenge. I suppose my one feeling about the article would be like, we can sort of say, oh, it's because of state agencies and the government are just standing around like hapless bystanders, like, oh, sorry, nothing to do with us. I don't think that that's a good enough excuse. It's a bit of a get out of jail free card. Like, when you're in government, it's about leadership, it's about responsibility. So I don't think we can just look to the state agency and agencies and say that is where the problem is. I think, ministerial departments and indeed the Taoiseach and Tánaiste are responsible for overseeing that. And
you mean it's a kind of a cloak of convenience for government at times? They can point the finger at the state agency and say, it's not, the problem isn't ours, the problem is theirs.
100%, that would be my feeling, because, that seems to be the tone of the article. But I ultimately think that, you lead from example, and these state agencies, they fall under the remit of the departments. It's not like they're entirely separate. Some of them will even get their budgets, budget lines from departments. So there is a degree of responsibility and ownership, I think, that needs to come into that. And look, like last year, the government told us they would have 40,000 homes in 2024. And then after the election, it was like, oh, sorry, folks, actually, that's not happening. We're not meeting that target, and we're not going to meet it in 2025.
I think in terms of Kieran, you have to accept as well, some of those agencies were set up with good bona fide. with an objective to develop the infrastructure and, I suppose, to bring in a technical knowledge that maybe politicians don't always have. But there is a recognition now that has to change again, and that the risk taking that is necessary, that this government will do that, and that we will take risks in terms of infrastructure development. 19.1 billion in the budget for 2026 for infrastructure development. Another thing that the last government have done, this government are implementing it, and that's the sectoral plans that I just mentioned, the National Development Plan that we will see in the coming months. The other thing that the last government did was introduce the new Planning and Development Bill and on Commission Planola, and we're seeing that will be setting timelines for decisions around planning applications. You mentioned the Galway City Outer Bypass. That's currently within Commission Planola. I'd love to see a positive decision within the next week or two. But hopefully from now on, as that new on Commission Planola gets to grips with planning, they will make decisions quicker. We've also invested more money in Commission Planola. So there are changes afoot, and I would be very hopeful that we will see the impact of that.
What has improved in terms of the delivery of all of that infrastructure on foot of the explosion of the number of state agencies and quangos that we've seen in the last 15 years?
Well, I think there's been unintended consequences, like I said earlier on, that they were all developing in a siloed manner rather than a kind of, and I think John Collison used the words harmonious or holistic, excuse me. So I think we need to change that. We need to get them working together. And I think the Accelerating Infrastructure Task Force will do that.
We needed to change it a decade ago. Like, these parties have been in power, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, as I said before, Fine Gael since 2011, effectively Fianna Fáil as well since 2016. And harmonisation, holistic, a joined up thinking, like, you'll knock the dogs on the street, they know we need joined up thinking. So I don't know why it's just coming to, realisation now of the government parties that this is suddenly something.
Is there a danger that we not autocorrect, and that we overcorrect? I just found one of the more kind of risible elements of John Collison's argument was that we established all these systems of checks and balances and this system of oversight because of corruption in politicians, and now the corruption is gone, we need to get rid of all of that oversight. I mean, it strikes me a little bit of like, let's bring guards into Temple Bar, and then when the crime rates fall, let's get rid of the guards again.
Absolutely.
No, but I think the thing about it is, Kieran, is that there possibly has been a risk-averse nature to government expenditure, possibly since the crash. There was a perception, I think, after the crash that every euro the government had spent was spent poorly. But that wasn't the case. There had been some good investment when we had the resources to do it. Possibly after that, we put in, particularly the Department of Public Expenditure, a range of checks and balances that slowed development. And I think now there's a realisation that we need again to be, take a risk in terms of infrastructure development.
I mean, I think what we should be doing is obviously Umbal Planola, as it was deeply, deeply under-resourced and understaffed. The court service was also deeply under-resourced and understaffed, and that has created this whole thing. But risk-adverse...
There has been more resourcing from government for those
but we need
agencies.
to see how that plays out, because it should have happened, a decade ago, as I said before. Risk-adverse, or perhaps a lack of ambition and a lack of vision, that would be a question mark over that. Maybe you took risks with the National Children's Hospital, which is absolutely years and years delayed, and 2.6 billion, most expensive hospital in the world.
What I
do think there is...
I'm not sure it is the most expensive hospital in the world.
Okay, well, it still costs 2.6 billion.
Well, I'm not sure it's the most expensive in the world. You just can't throw out things like that. I'm not sure it is. I'm not defending that. I'm querying your comment that it's the most expensive hospital in the world.
You can
I think the data says that, in fact, the data from the Parliamentary Budget Office says it's not.
Okay,
yeah, I don't think it is the most expensive, but it was 600 odd million initially, and it's now north of 2 billion.
Yeah, I don't deny that. But again, we can't just make general comments and think the public can accept them. We have to challenge them when they're not true.
Well, the National Children's Hospital has worked very well then, perhaps. That's what we think. I think what we can see as well is a procurement challenge. There doesn't seem to be a proper, sufficient procurement plan in place. Why did the National Children's Hospital go so far over budget? Why has it been delayed for so long? Where is the blame? Who holds the responsibility? Can you answer that?
Well, certainly one of the issues that definitely arose was the increase in labour, increase in costs and materials throughout the Ukrainian war. That was one issue. But my objective is to see it open at the earliest possible opportunity, and that sadly I hope nobody ever has the need to use it. But unfortunately we will find that people will, and I hope that we get it open in the shortest possible time frame, and that the sick children who need it get to access and use it as soon as possible.
There are children today who
Absolutely
need it, who
there
don't
are,
have
and we need to pursue it and make sure that we get it open as soon as possible.
When you speak to government ministers, are they frustrated at the lack of power that they might have compared to their predecessors in the past? Or is it convenient? Do they think this is actually handy, that there's a state agency or a semi-state agency that I can point the finger of blame at? I get the Department of Health, the HSE, the Minister for Health. That's the classic example of three different groups pointing at each other.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they do want to pass the blame. I think what they want to do is actually get stuff delivered, and that is increasingly difficult. And I mean, you have to question why, and you have to question why there's not more being done. I mean, John mentions an accelerating infrastructure task force. Like, for God's sake, like, how many task force? Like, you talk about the National Development Plan that was published in July. If Sinn Féin or the Social Democrats or anyone else had published that, the government would have criticised them to the hilt, because it was tiny. There was no details in it.
Because the
plans, yeah, but where are they, John? They were meant to come out in October. Now you're saying last month. The housing plan was meant to come out in July. Haven't seen it. It was initially June, then it was July, then it was August, then it was October. Now it's next month. If we're lucky, it's next month. So there is, you know, you can blame bodies all you want, but there is, I think, the government have had their eye off the ball. And I mean, John said earlier, you know, the last government didn't have the same emphasis on infrastructure delivery. It was the same government.
It wasn't the same government.
It was the same government. So you'd have to question why. I mean, if you look at this budget, there was a real emphasis on infrastructure, and I think that's welcome. And I think what was also welcome was the fact that Minister Jack Chambers and Minister Paschal Donoghue said that if things go wrong, we don't know what financial headwinds are coming, but if things go wrong, there will continue to be investment in infrastructure. Because when you think that we're a country as well off as we are, like Patricia was saying, that there's not going to be enough water connections, there's not going to be enough electricity connections for new homes, that's a huge issue. So you'd have to question why this government, which is the same as the last government, bar a few, or well, minus the Green Party, put in a few independents, it's the same government. You'd have to question why they're only waking up to this issue now and why they didn't do more last time. Was it the Greens who held you back the last time?
I wouldn't like to be proportioning blame to people who aren't here to defend themselves, you know. But certainly, it's a different government. It's a different government. It is not the same government. I think Minister Chambers himself has noted that there is a different emphasis on infrastructure development in this government, and that we're reforming how we deliver infrastructure. And we're seeing that. We're seeing the action plan from the accelerating. I know Louise isn't fond of the term, but we are going to see the action plan from the accelerating infrastructure task force being developed next month and published. And we are going to see the sectoral plans of each department of the National Development Plan. So we are seeing this, and I think we will see far more achievable targets in those sectoral plans and clear plans as to how we can develop them again in the shortest possible time frame.
Patricia, there's something odd in all of this, isn't there, given the level of conversation that's been that's happened on foot of this article from John Collison. We look across the Atlantic and we scratch our heads and we wonder how it is these tech billionaires have managed to influence government policy to the degree they have, be they Elon Musk or Peter Thiel or anybody else. And the whole country seems to be talking about John Collison, a guy who, along with his brother, set up like a payments platform, kind of the classic middleman, with taking a bit off the top, and somehow he's kind of the oracle when it comes to the direction of travel for the entire country. Yeah, and it's always concerning, depending on like who is defining this, who's defining the common good. You know, it obviously should be led by government and leadership if we had real leadership and people taking actual responsibility, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And you know, I think we saw the Tánaiste and Taoiseach both sort of commenting on the article, you know, and I think, look, ultimately, like, I think that this is like a get out of jail free card to point the finger at state agencies, get them off the hook, not take responsibility. And you know, it actually really is, as you've said, and as Louise said as well, it is basically the same government in various forms. And in fact, let's be honest, these two parties have led the country. It's the same opposition. We've been hearing the same stuff from the same opposition for the last number of years as well, and they kind of change as you know, they're so populist, they change as we go on to just tackle the next issue. They never set the agenda. But the government is setting the agenda here. We have developed the infrastructure division. Is it your suggestion that oppositions should set the agenda? No, well, I'm suggesting that if they had any plans to come forward, the government would be open to listening to them. Absolutely, but it's responsive all the time. It's responsive all the time to the government they are. And, you know, we see it here again. The government are developing plans. They've developed the infrastructure division within the Department of Public Expenditure, the Accelerating Infrastructure Task Force, and that has, as I said, a more holistic approach to how we develop our public infrastructure. And I think we will see the benefits of that. I'd be very happy to give John a copy of our housing plan, because the government always say this, to say, you don't offer any solutions, no solutions, you're always just complaining, which, by the way, holding the government accountable is actually the job of the opposition, just to be clear. But in addition to that, we've heard nothing about their own infrastructure plans. Nothing.
Nothing about how they intend to develop infrastructure quicker, only relying on the article in the newspaper and I suppose criticising what the government is doing.
Construction company. We could be doing land preparation. We could, for example, be giving more power to local authorities because we've got the weakest local government in Western Europe.
I'm not sure about that.
For example, these are all different things we could sit down and have a chat about if you're well open to it. But the idea that the opposition and the Social Democrats are not presenting tangible, good policies is just deeply untrue.
Louise, they could have shown either Micheál Martin or Simon Harris a little bit of leadership and just dismissed this article out of hand and said, if we want the advice of a tech billionaire, we'll ring him.
I mean, they could have, but I think they realised that a lot of what John Collison is actually saying is a lot of what they have been saying, and they were saying that it was certainly food for thought. And I mean, when you look at some of the arguments that John is making in his article, he's speaking about projects that you can't deny that have been impacted and have been held up by red tape and bureaucracy. I mean, he mentioned one project, the Dublin Drainage project, which I was at the opening of a wastewater treatment plant in Arklow at some stage over the summer, and that went to planning at the same time as the Dublin Drainage project that opened on time and on budget, whereas the Dublin Drainage programme is still caught up. We saw another objection and judicial review put in against it there recently when we thought it was across the line. So they can't really deny that the issues are there, particularly when it comes to projects like that. We look at the Metrolink, something that was shelved that would have cost a fraction of the price that it's going to cost now. You know, that could have been built years and years ago. But again, and potentially correctly at the time, the government rode back on infrastructure because things were, you know, in the toilet, and they had to find money for somewhere, for things from somewhere, and that projects like that were shelved. But you would just wonder if things like that had been done at the time, the situation we'd be in now, and the prosperity, potential prosperity that we could have gotten from that.
John, the broad point as well that John Collison makes is that population growth is outstripping the pace with which we can deliver infrastructure. And before the break, in the context of the presidential election, we were talking about, you know, dissatisfaction and disaffection with the democratic system. I mean, not to wade too much into the realm of existential threat, but this is a really dangerous road to be on, isn't it? As a country and as a democracy, where, you know, if that plays out to its natural end point, you've got the complete breakdown of the social contract, you know, the complete breakdown of it. And with that, people will completely turn their back on the systems that have served us well for the last century.
Yeah, look, I understand. I suppose I think it's important that we give people but we give people a sense that they have a stake in society.
Do you suspect sitting around at a cabinet table that they understand
I'm sure
the level of threat that we actually face?
Well, I'm sure they understand that it's important that we develop sufficient number of houses for the population. Everybody would understand that. And giving people the dignity of a home and making sure that everyone has, you know, a part of a community, the children attend the local school, they can get there easily. Everybody wants to see that standard of living for the community, and we understand the benefit of that standard of living.
We're a long way from that.
Well, we are. But again,
successive housing plans that have failed to deliver that. Why should anybody at home have any faith that the next housing plan will do it?
I think because we are putting in measures here that will ensure that we can develop the infrastructure that we need to complement the housing. And just a point you made earlier, Kieran, in terms of why wouldn't the government contest what John Collison has said? Because we are actually taking measures and steps just this year to implement what he is saying.